Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Welcome back to another 1/400 scale diecast model aircraft review of this, the McDonnell-Douglas MD-90. The MD series, or the DC-9 series as it technically could be called, I suppose, it is a legendary aircraft in the regional jet market. Yes, the Mad Dog, as it has been known, only very recently, within the last week, left the skies in commercial service, being retired finally by its last major operator, Delta Airlines, in whose livery we see this MD-90. McDonnell-Douglas, they have a very long and illustrious history in the civil aviation market as well as in the military aviation scene. However, their crowning achievement in terms of their regional jets, their narrow-body airliners, the MD series, the DC-9, the MD-80, MD-90, and the Boeing 717, derived from what would have been the MD-95, they have now left the skies. First flying on February 22, 1993, the MD-90 has served venerably chiefly with Delta Airlines. American Airlines also was a major operator of MD-90s until the 2nd of June 2020, when the last revenue service flight of an MD-90 landed in Atlanta, Georgia. Produced between 1993 and 2000, 116 MD-90s were produced at an initial unit cost of $48.5 million US. Obviously, as we mentioned, this aircraft was developed from the DC-9 and MD-80. It also had an MD-94X variant. Unfortunately, though, that aircraft never saw production. It turned into the MD-95, which turned into the Boeing 717, which still is in service right now, limited as a regional jet as well. In terms of what we have here from Gemini Jets, well, as you will see, we do have a very competently produced model, although there are a couple of assembly and detail faults on it that I will be pointing out in due course. But with the MD-80, MD-90 no longer in the skies in revenue service anymore, certainly it is one that I think a lot of people are going to be happy that they have in their collections. And of course, we're not likely to see too many more of these produced, at least in the near future, although I would not at all be surprised if we do see commemorative releases of, in particular, the Delta MD-80s and MD-90s produced in short order, because obviously they have just been retired, and a lot of people, including myself, are feeling awfully nostalgic about the venerable Mad Dog. Let's take a closer look at this wonderful 1/400 scale by Gemini Jets rendition of the MD-90. Before we get into taking a closer look at the model, of course, we need to take a look at the box in which it came. Zooming out and coming into frame, here is the box. Typical Gemini Jets box. Can't get the whole thing into frame because obviously close range. However, you can see front and center on the top panel of this box, we do have ourselves a rendering of the aircraft in question. There is the MD-90. It is, in this picture, slightly bigger than the actual model, but there it is. It looks reasonable enough. Slightly weird shape on the cheat line there with the lower part of the livery. Makes the fuselage look as if it has been cleaved with a knife, but no, that is just a picture, of course. Looks pretty decent. Of course, registration and things like that visible in the rendering. Upper left of the box, there is the Gemini Jets 20th anniversary logo, slightly altered from how it currently appears, 1998 to 2018. Made for collectors by collectors with the appropriate trade and dress branding there. Delta, McDonnell-Douglas MD-90, the SkyTeam logo there. Also on the right side of the box, you've got a rendering of the Delta logo there. 1/400 die-cast scale model aircraft, as you would expect to see. Bottom panel, Gemini Jets, and then goes through all of the selling features on the model. Back side of the box, you got another rendering of the aircraft, this time in a very steep climb. That's an angle of attack for you. Gemini Jets, as real as it gets, and then all of the other markings and little blurbs that you get on the backs of these boxes. Boeing, officially licensed product, because Boeing, of course, bought all the rights to the McDonnell-Douglas branding quite a while back, made in China, and then your social media links for Gemini Jets, all of that. Copyright Gemini Jets, Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. Bottom panel we took a look at. Side panel, there is a sticker just from the distributor there, shows you when they got it in their stock, but there is another rendering of the aircraft there, McDonnell-Douglas MD-90, and all of that stuff. In the inside panel, when you open up the box, obviously there is the void wherein the aircraft would be sitting, and then we have got ourselves this write-up that Gemini Jets often do on their boxes, and I really do appreciate these. It just gives you a little bit of a cheat sheet about the aircraft in question, and you can pause the video here. It should be high enough resolution for you to read this if you so desire, but looks very nice. Obviously, with this aircraft being a derivative of a larger family, you can see that immediately Gemini Jets start talking about the DC-9, which was the parent of this whole series of aircraft. With the huge success of the DC-9 program that started in 1965, McDonnell-Douglas knew there was still lots of potential remaining in this robust airliner by incorporating several enhancements. First launched in 1977 as the DC-9-80, its moniker reflected the planned into-service year of 1980, with a dual launch of longtime McDonnell-Douglas customers Swiss Air and Austrian Airlines. Swiss Air took first deliveries of their DC-9-80s in September of 1980. Initial versions of the generic DC-9-80 name included the DC-9-81 and DC-9-82 versions. Both features improvements over the earlier DC-9 types with a substantially stretched fuselage, more modern interiors, more range and payload, with upgraded engines and enlarged control surfaces. In June of 1983, McDonnell-Douglas changed the DC-9-80 series designations to the MD-81 and MD-82. Refinement to the MD-80 series later brought the MD-83 and MD-87, which was a short-body type. Final iteration of the MD-80 series was the MD-88 that entered service in January of 1988. The MD-88 featured an all-new modern EFIS glass cockpit. MD-80 production began to wind down. MD launched the final type of the DC-9 legacy, known as the MD-90, which this aircraft is, with the addition of a slightly stretched fuselage and all-new high-bypass IAE V2500 turbofan engines. MD now had an aircraft that could compete into the 21st century. Launched with a large order from Delta Airlines in November of 1989, with deliveries that started in February of 1995. With its comfortable 3+2 seating in economy, 2+2 in first class, the MD-90 is the preferred choice of many domestic flyers, as it was at the time that was written. Some schematic views now of the aircraft. Length 152 feet 7 inches, height 30 feet 7 inches. You can see obviously a side view of the aircraft there taken from the port side. Livery we can see on this model, Delta Airlines. An aircraft type is the MD-90-30. Construction number on this particular airframe was 53384, line number 2096. Registration November 9004 Delta Alpha. The engines were two IAE V2525/D5s. First flight of this particular airframe was March 1st, 1995, delivered on March 24th of 1995. Empty weight, 88,000 pounds, cruising speed of 504 miles per hour with a range of 2,085 miles. The seating is 141 in mixed class or 172 in high density. And here another schematic view from above of the aircraft showing the wingspan of 107 feet 10 inches. And then, of course, visit our website for new releases at GeminiJets.com. So that about covers the box of the MD-90. Now let's take a little bit of a closer look at this wonderful model. As the Gemini Jets box branding would belie, this aircraft, the MD-90 seen here, is basically the last manifestation of a long and very proud history of regional jets produced by McDonnell-Douglas, starting with the DC-9 all the way back in the mid-1960s. The MD-90, basically, it is the zenith in development of that series. You could argue the Boeing 717 actually is the absolute last in this class. That originally had been intended to be launched as the MD-95. However, the Boeing-McDonnell merger had happened and Boeing reappropriated the aircraft and called it the 717, but basically that is the MD-95. But the MD-90 seen here, we've got ourselves a very mature design overall. Technical specifications on the MD-90-30 as we see here are as follow. We have got that 2+2 or 2+3 seating arrangement. It is a single-aisle, narrow-body airliner. Generally speaking, basically the DC-9 all the way through the MD-95 or 717, they're intended to be regional airliners. They were not intended to do transatlantic service and things like that, and they don't have the range to do that. However, in terms of connecting flights or smaller, shorter haul regional flights, you would be looking at something like this to be filling that particular role. Overall cargo capacity on the aircraft is 1,300 cubic feet. Overall length of the fuselage is 152.6 feet. The fuselage width is 131.6 inches, and the fuselage height is 142 inches. So there is the narrow body design here. Overall height from the bottom of the main gear to the top of the horizontal stabilizers there across the tail, we have 30.6 feet. Maximum takeoff weight 156,000 pounds. Empty weight 88,200 pounds with a max payload of 41,800 pounds. Fuel capacity 39,128 pounds fully loaded, and of course the turbofan engines on the back of the MD-90 were the International Aero Engines V2500 specification. Total thrust from both of those engines, 25,000 pound-feet at sea level with a maximum speed of 0.84 Mach. Maximum cruising speed generally, though, at 0.76 Mach. Service ceiling on the aircraft, 37,000 feet, and a total range of 2,045 nautical miles. That's assuming 153 passengers on board. Runway length required for takeoff, 7,000 feet. So you can see there that we have got a lower weight, overall smaller aircraft with the need of only a 7,000-foot runway to get off the ground. So that is going to be lending itself wonderfully into some smaller regional airports. Therefore, it could be in service for connecting flights or just lower demand regional flights overall. In terms of what we have overall, in terms of the design, we've got ourselves basically a child of the 60s. All sorts of different aircraft designs were coming out into the civil aviation market at this time as the engineers were trying to figure out what overall plan suits these aircraft best. And in terms of a shorter haul regional service, well, we have basically the sky as the limit in terms of what we can have. Notice that we have a very unconventional design by modern standards. We don't have any engines mounted on the wings, either above or below. We have got a low wing design as well. The engines on the MD series here, from the DC-9 all the way through to the MD-95s, Boeing 717, we have got two engines mounted at the rear of the fuselage, leaving the wings completely clear and the forward section of the fuselage completely clear. This meant that the aircraft basically was very efficient aerodynamically. It had very low drag, and that also meant that it was very quiet from on board. By basically where the cockpit is, where the pilots are sitting, they couldn't even really hear the engines. So pilots who did fly this aircraft, they often say that it basically felt like a glider in some respects because it was just so quiet. And of course, unless you were sitting toward the back there in the tail section of the fuselage, it would be very quiet for the passengers as well. But if you were sitting there at the rear with your window seat, you would get a great view of those engines chuffing away, throwing out tons and tons of power and sounding absolutely awesome while so doing. Definitely wish that we could have flown an MD-80, MD-90 in my lifetime, but never got the chance. A moment of silence. Yes, with my hopes and dreams absolutely crushed. Gemini Jets, of course, doing their typical great job on this model as well as they do on many of their others. Taking a look at the nose of the aircraft here, what do we have? And please do bear with me because we have a very small model here. The whole thing only measures about 4.5 inches long, so it is very, very tiny, which means that our camera's having a little bit of trouble focusing on it, but there it is. Looking at the nose of the aircraft, we can see here that we've got great detail in the shut line around the radar dome at the nose tip, so that looks right and that looks good. The cockpit area, the cockpit windows look good. We do have windshield wipers installed there below the forwardmost windows. We also have the static ports and pitot tubes. There are air data sensors. We have this little canard winglet just to arrears and slightly below one of the pitot tube inlets there. That looks good. We also have these smaller ducts or little veins or something, these darker areas that are just below the cockpit windows. Again, I'm not entirely sure what those are for. They may be misters for the de-icing system or something along those lines. However, a little bit more research is needed on my standpoint of figuring out what those are. We've got our main entry and exit door here, just rears of the cockpit windows. That all looks good. We do have the SkyTeam logo on top of that, as well as some of the detailing for the opening and closing handles and things like that. We also have this hatch just below the door. I believe that would be for air stairs. Below that, obviously, we have got our Delta logo and our Delta branding along the top side of the fuselage moving rearward. Also, we have got our cabin windows, typical Gemini Jets. These are all printed on, no water slide decals here for any of the graphics that you see, but the printing looks crisp and clean. Definitely a big fan of what they do. I do like the overall shape of the nose that we can see here. It looks very accurate and it looks very clean. I don't see any ugliness with the mold or anything like that. Looks good. Looking down toward the nose landing gear, the landing gear is fixed on the nose here. The wheels do not roll, however, it looks good, the size looks correct, and the aircraft sits very nicely on the nose gear. As we move rearward, We can see more of the cabin windows, the detail on there looking pretty good, and the main landing gear there just below the wings. The main landing gear do roll, so the wheels and tires do roll. That is a plastic wheel and a rubber tire around it, and that's actually the same for front and rear there for the nose gear. Moving rearward, we can see that we do have some of the emergency exits, the overwing exits there, just in these two areas right here. And you can see the decal work that would show that section of fuselage being able to be punched out if it were necessary to evacuate in a hurry. And of course, there is an appropriate overwing exit decal on the wing root there as well. Moving rearward still, you can see the U.S. flag and the aircraft's registration, November 904 Delta Alpha. We also have a rear exit or a service door as well. I believe some of the galley area would have been back in that area, so some loading of some food and other cargo may happen through that door as well. And then moving toward the rear of the fuselage, you can see the left engine there with the fan blades installed. Looks very nice. Good job on a 2018 Gemini Jets release. Looks good. Toward the rear, we can see the empennage, a very unconventional empennage. We have got ourselves the vertical stabilizer and then the horizontal stabilizer on top of the tail. This is yielding a T-tail design. Obviously, you would put the horizontal stabilizer up in that area to get it out of the aerodynamic wake and the exhaust of the engines, and that would spoil the airflow and severely hamper, I would assume, the elevator authority on the aircraft. So get them up high, get them into clean air, which would be more or less undisturbed because the rest of the aircraft is well below that level. Therefore, I assume that you would have a lot of elevator authority on this aircraft. Controllability would be very good. Moving back forward toward the leading edge of the left wing. As we can see here, that looks nice and crisp and clean. It's very straight. I see no defects along the leading edge with the paint or anything like that. Definitely looking very, very nice for this MD-90. Taking a nose-on view of MD-90 now, you can see more of that detail along the nose. I'll try to zoom in as closely as we may. See if we can focus on that nose. No, we cannot. We'll have to pull out a little bit. There we go. So more of the detail on the nose section now, and you can see these three small areas just below the cockpit windows. I need to do some more research to figure out what those things are, but I believe they would be part of the de-icing system. They'd be misters of some sort. Also along the nose tip, you can see the radar dome. The radar array, the principal radar array would be below this panel, which of course would be removable for servicing. But you can also see that we have these very small details that run forward from the main shut line rearward, and they run forward about halfway down the nose tip. Like that detail a lot, very nicely rendered there by Gemini. Shifting our depth of field rearward a little bit now, we can bring the engines into focus, and you can see the fan blade details on both of the engines. They look right. They look very crisp and clean. I love the fan blade details on these 1400s because they are so tiny, yet they manage to render them cleanly. Obviously, the fan blades do not spin as they do on many 1200 scale models, but they look good enough, and I've got to say they look fine here. Shifting the focus to the tail, you can see that the vertical stabilizer and rudder assembly is a little bit crooked relative to the rest of the aircraft, so that's an assembly fault, and from nose on here and zoomed in quite heavily, it doesn't look all that good, but that's an assembly fault, and I think, again, because we're talking about something that's only about 4.5 inches long, I think we can basically pardon them for that, because it's got to be difficult to make sure that that is absolutely 100% correct for every single model that they produce. Looking across the leading edge of the right wing, that also looks absolutely fine in terms of the detailing. The wing is straight across, no funny business in terms of geometry, and no assembly faults that I can see. Also here, visible on the nose, just below the nose, we can see the nose landing gear doors. Obviously with the landing gear extended, the doors are open, and that looks fine. If we can get it to focus in that area once again, there it goes. And then also you can see the main landing gear doors also open on either side of the main gear there, the main gear struts. Looks very nice, and looks complete and correct as far as I'm concerned from here. Absolutely wonderful. Closer look now along the starboard side of the aircraft. looking edge on here, this is where that unmistakable profile of the DC-9 MD-80 MD-90 series really comes to the fore. I love the design. It looks so sleek and clean, and unfortunately it is now something that is consigned to the history books, but honestly, I love it. Absolutely, it's fantastic. Moving across to the forward side of the aircraft, there is the nose once again. Again, I love the shape of the nose on this, and you can see more pitot tubes and set ports along the nose from the right side. Moving rearward, there is the Delta branding on the upper side of the fuselage, and then as we start to move rear, you can see that sheet line in the livery as it starts to sweep up toward the wing root there in the wing spar area where they join up to the fuselage. That's something that kind of was lost in translation on the box art, simply because the box is blue and the livery happens to be almost the identical shade of blue as the Gemini Jets box. So that looked a little bit strange on the box, but there in context on the actual model, you can see that it makes perfect sense and it looks absolutely fine. More details that we can see moving across from front to rear on the aircraft as we go up into the wing root. It looks like we do have some service doors and cargo doors in this section here. Small cargo hold on the MD-90, but it is there and obviously it would be accessible by the ground crews. Moving aft, there is the right wing now, and there's the U.S. flag again, and our November 904 Delta Alpha registration of this aircraft. There is the right engine nacelle. Details along the sides here, start valves, external start valves, and external ports there for plugging into the engine from the ground. Very nice. Some vents in this area for our auxiliary power unit intake air, I would assume. And then, of course, ventilation for the rest of the cabin. And then moving rearward, there is the tail cone, and obviously our vertical stabilizer there with our shut lines and different hinge points for the rudder. Very plainly evident. Looks very, very nice. I like that a whole lot. Rear view now of MD-90. There's a lot going on back here. Obviously, we have got our T-tail, our horizontal and vertical stabilizer in the empennage area. That looks good, even though it is a little bit crooked. However, you can see in the tail cone here, everything just tapering to a very fine and relatively sharp point there at the rear of the aircraft. But that looks good. You can see the struts that are attaching the two engines to the side of the fuselage. That looks good, and obviously that's shaped aerodynamically so that it generates the least amount of drag possible. The exhaust area, the exhaust side of the engines there, you can see more fan blades in there. Not 100% sure if that's what it would actually look like. I'd have to take a look at some more reference photos, but looks believable enough to me. And of course the engines are fitted nicely, and the painting there, silver on the exhaust side of the engines as it is on the intake side of the engines as well, at least with the fan blade assembly. That looks good. Other access doors visible there on the lower side of the aircraft for the APU, and I believe that the MD-90 had air stairs as well in the tail, so you can see a hatch there for that as well. That looks good. Trailing edges of the wings, they also look crisp, clean, and sharp and straight, so that's absolutely fine. And then of course the trailing side of the main landing gear also plainly evident here. Looks good. And a view from the port side of the aircraft. A mirror image of the starboard side, as you can see. Moving forward again, there we go, more static ports, and then our main entry and exit door visible there. Looks good. And then moving rearward, we start to get into the cabin windows, including a couple that are blanked off. We can assume that the window shades are pulled down, or that's just where a partition would be for this particular setup in terms of cabin configuration. U.S. flag and registration, once again, looks right. And then moving rearward, looks good. Also, you can see the red strobe here on the left wing, just visible there. Nicely done with the paintwork. I do like all of that immensely. Now, just to close us out here with a couple of freehand shots, so we might be able to get a little bit closer to some of the finer details on this aircraft. Obviously, there is your nose. I really like the nose sections on these models because there's a lot going on here, and you can just see the intricate printing work that's been done in these areas trying to render some of those details. You can see that we do have a partial registration down there on the nose gear door, so that looks good. And the little eyebrow windows in the upper section of the fuselage in the cockpit. The pilots loved those and hated those at the same time. They loved it because it gave them a little bit better sight line through some steeply banked turns, but it also let the sun in there, and flying at high altitude, the sun is quite bright, quite brilliant, and quite hot as well. So they used to stick checklists and other things up there in those windows as sunshades, just so that when they weren't using them, they could not fry in the cockpit. There is your main entry-exit door. It looks good. Your SkyTeam branding, and then more static ports and things along the side here with your cabin windows. That looks good. There are your overwing exits, and then the overwing printing there, just to show the passengers, if they are panicked trying to get out of there, which direction do they go to get away from the aircraft. Obviously running down the wing to jump off of the flaps, presuming that they'd be extended for landing. However, they would be going directly into the intake area for the engine, so please run out of there and then run immediately at 90 degrees perpendicular to the aircraft. The only thing that I will draw your attention to in terms of faults, other than the vertical stabilizer being a little bit crooked on this, we do have a paint or printing fault here. I'm not entirely sure which is which in terms of paint or print, but you can see that the beacon here, that red beacon, that would be a rotating strobe there, just to give a location beacon in terms of where the aircraft is visually. You can see that there has been a paint smudge there, so that red paint quite obviously was intended for the beacon, but it just smudged over there to the left side, and it is unfortunately very noticeable by eye. Obviously the camera magnifies things greatly, but very noticeable just by eye as well. I've tried to sort of scuff and scour that area to get some of that paint off, but it basically became a question of, do I want to destroy the finish on the aircraft or just deal with that paint flaw? And I chose to deal with that paint flaw, but that would have been something that happened at the factory quite obviously, and it either was brushed by a worker or they put it in the box too quickly, and obviously the paint was not cured yet, and that's what happened. But that's the only paint flaw on this model, and it's basically the only paint flaw on any of my Gemini Jets models. So if you're going to have a flaw, it's kind of a big one to have, but at the same time, it's not structural. It's nothing that's going to require repair. Unfortunately, it's not really something that I could repair to the same standard that it would have been had it left the factory okay. So it is what it is, but just wanted to point that out as basically the only flaw on this aircraft. Moving down, you can see that we have the tail there. And another partial registration right there in very small print near the top of the tail below the horizontal stabilizer. So there it is. Nice printing otherwise on this model. It does look very nice. I am very pleased to report. There's that red strobe again on the wingtip. Looks good. And then your flaps and slots and spoiler detail going on. Looks good. Then obviously the right wing looks similar, but we do have a green strobe on that right wingtip. Looks very nice. Very, very nice. Aside from that paint smudge, looks very good. And overall, I have to say once again that I am generally pleased with this offering from Gemini Jets, as I have been with the other ones that I have currently in the collection. Looks really good.
There it was, in 1/400th scale, the McDonnell-Douglas MD-90 in Delta Airlines livery by Gemini Jets. Another fine model by Gemini. They do a great job on most of the aircraft that they bring to us, and this one being a 2018 release, definitely that fits very well in their product lineup. Again, a couple of assembly and detail faults that we pointed out there. Obviously, the vertical stabilizer is mounted a little bit crookedly. It's tilted a little bit to aircraft left, and it is noticeable, particularly when you are looking at it squarely from the nose or from the tail, as you can see right now. However, it's minor, and when you're looking at the aircraft from a distance or from side on, you don't notice it at all, so I think we could excuse them on that because that part is extremely small in reality. It looks a whole lot bigger than it actually is because of what the camera can do. However, much more noticeable, in my opinion, is that smudge on that location beacon there, the red strobe light on top of the fuselage with that paint smear going down to the left side of the fuselage. That is very noticeable, and that is something that when I opened this thing for the first time, I saw that immediately and said, is there anything I can do about that? And after some investigation and trial and error, I concluded that I cannot safely do anything about that without damaging the paint finish on this aircraft, and that's not a worthy compromise in my opinion. So that's going to remain on this particular model. I would be very interested, though, to hear in the comments if anybody does have a model of this aircraft or a similarly liveried MD-80, MD-90 series by Gemini, and if you have also had any sort of paint flaws like that on yours, please leave a comment if you know anything about that in terms of if there was ever any notice put out by Gemini as to these paint faults, or if it's just something that it's basically luck of the draw. But aside from those small detractors, this is a very nice 1/400 scale model. It is very small, obviously, because in this scale things are very small, and the overall length of this model is only about 4.5 inches, so it is tiny. Do handle it with care, but quite obviously, being true to the scale and being true to the relative sizes of other aircraft in the scale, you would expect it to be that size, so that all looks correct and very much appropriate for this particular rendition of the MD-90. That's all I've got for you today, though. I do hope very much that you've all enjoyed this look at the Gemini Jets MD-90 in 1/400. Please leave any comments if you have any suggestions for other models that you'd like to see me do, or if you've got any suggestions in terms of what you'd like to see moreover in these videos moving forward. Thank you all very much for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thanks, and of course, we will see you soon.